Hey everyone, welcome to an Advanced Sports Analytics live stream. Today is Monday, May 24th. Hope everyone had a good weekend and looking forward to some NBA action tonight. It's been a fun first weekend and kind of first week of the playing games. A lot of really great games. We have tonight game 2 of Miami-Milwaukee, which went into overtime. In game 1, game 2 of the Denver-Portland series, in which Portland upset Denver in game 1. So I think some fun storylines really for both games, and going to dive into those today, specifically looking at the single game champion mode contests on SuperDraft. Our optimizer at ASA is programmed to handle projections and optimization for the SuperDraft single game contest, these champion mode contests. You can select showdown. They call it single game, but the champion mode, but showdown single game format. Select SD SuperDraft as your site, and we'll start with the Miami-Milwaukee game, seeing as that one's first. You can view projections for players and their utility multiplier in the all tab, and identify which players we're projecting as kind of the strongest values per their multiplier. When we run the optimal, so the lineups are constructed where you have a champion who has a 50% boost to their multiplier. So for this first lineup with Drew Holiday, he's got the 1.55 multiplier. When we multiply that by 1.15, he's got a 2.325 multiplier, and they just round up to 235. And then all the other guys, have the multipliers that you see in the projections tab, or in the all tab rather. Sorting on projected SuperDraft points will show you the raw projection for every player. The value column, sorting on that, will show you the post multiplier projection for every player. So you can get a sense of how players rate out with their multiplier factored in. This is kind of the crux of SuperDraft scoring. Not only figuring out which players are going to score the most fantasy points, but understanding kind of how that fits in with multipliers, I think is super important. With this game and this series, we're going to see, I think, every night Giannis will be at the top end or kind of bottom, I guess, of the multiplier spectrum. Expect he'll be at 1 pretty much every night, and then Butler and Adebayo follow him, and then the secondary Milwaukee pieces, Middleton, Holiday, are kind of in this low multiplier, but outside of the top tier of players. And then after that, we're just going to have kind of these tertiary players, Hero, Lopez, some starters like DiVincenzo, Lopez at 2.2x, but in kind of the starting lineup, Duncan Robinson starting lineup, and then some of these lower guys. One thing I think to note with the playoffs is that teams are shrinking their rotations. We've seen most teams play anywhere from 7 to 9 guys. Sometimes even only 7 or 8 guys. And those guys off the bench, Portis, Connaughton, Forbes, these are guys who during the regular season have been playing, around or even north of 20 minutes. And in the playoffs, teams are kind of truncating some of those bench minutes for players, and we're seeing a little more run for some of the starters. Different teams are doing that, I think, to varying extents. We've seen in game 1, Milwaukee kept it pretty tight. I think both Giannis and Middleton had 40-plus minute games. Of course, it went to overtime. Holiday as well. I think it was Giannis and Middleton maybe 43 and 44, and Holiday maybe 42 or 41, something like that. And Milwaukee keeping it very tight. Not giving really any of these bench players super long run. So we are projecting minutes as such. Miami, I think, keeping it a little wider, giving a little more run to some of the bench guys like Dragic. I think had a high 20s, low 30s game Iguodala in the low 20s. But, some of the deeper bench guys not getting any run. Okpala, Struss, even Tyler Hero, who at times this year has been playing in kind of the high 20s. I think only got like 19 minutes game one. So it's I think something to keep an eye on. In regular season games with these single game formats, you can kind of get creative with some of these deeper bench players and hope that they get 15 to 20 minutes of run and just put up insane kind of efficiency. Some of those deep guys that we might have considered in previous games just like won't even see the floor. Guys like Okpala or Achua. Some of these guys just who were playing in games earlier this year just probably aren't going to see the floor. It is, I think, creating kind of a more condensed player pool, which I think is going to force you to kind of make difficult decisions on players that, are in the starting lineup or kind of key bench players that, you can get exposure to everyone, but, you're going to naturally have kind of lower exposure to some of your stars. We've been finding so far that keeping things tight, being willing to lock in some players or even lock in a couple players or, have three to four guys in kind of the 60 to 100% exposure range if you're running multiple lineups to be effective. I think that'll be the case tonight with both Miami and Milwaukee, likely to keep their rotations pretty tight. So if we go to the optimal lineup, we have Drew Holiday at champion. Among kind of the trio of star Bucks, Giannis obviously up top. He's just got the lowest multiplier, figures to be hyper productive, figures to get a lot of minutes. He was shut down or kind of managed pretty low efficiency game, had some struggles from the free throw line late. I think Giannis is a fine spot to go back to. The narrative might be that, Giannis is in playoff choke mode. I think Giannis is a fine spot to go back. He does it really in all facets of the game, can score, can rebound, obviously a great defender, can assist. He's got probably the most triple-double equity out of any of the guys playing, most double-double equity as well, maybe along with someone like Bam. Like Giannis a good bit. We just like Holiday as kind of the preferred of the Milwaukee guys when you're sorting by value. We got Holiday, Middleton, and Giannis all towards the top. I think the thinking with Holiday, like he projects to play similar minutes to Middleton and Giannis, maybe a minute or two less. Obviously, we'll have lower usage than Giannis, but kind of comparable usage to Middleton. And I think, Holiday, just comparing him to Middleton, they just have similar multipliers, expect to get similar minutes and kind of offensive usage. Holiday so far this year has been a slightly more efficient shooter, higher true shooting percentage. Also, him and Middleton are kind of comparable in terms of their rebounding rate, but Holiday's a much more effective distributor. Gets more assists, has a higher assist rate than Middleton. And I think the big difference between Holiday and Middleton is, Holiday is, I think, a far more effective defender. Middleton's kind of a near zero when it comes to steals and blocks. Holiday, averages 1.5 or so steals a game. And, if he can rack up steals at 1.55x, the steals and blocks rather are worth 3 points apiece pre-multiplier. So some elevated value for those defensive metrics. And, also with the double-double bonus, similar to how it is on DraftKings, I do think Holiday could get there with assists. I think probably longer odds than someone like Giannis or Bam, but outside of maybe those two guys, and I could see like a Butler or Lopez getting there on kind of points and rebounds. I think Holiday's probably got, I would wager maybe third best odds to get a double-double via points and assists. He can also do it through rebounds as well. I think he's averaging about 6 rebounds a game. I think Holiday is a really strong place to go for cash purposes as your champion or as your one of your utility players. Lopez we like a good bit. He is him and Ariza kind of stand out as two of the starters that are projectable for 30 plus minutes that have the strong multiplier on them. looks like, I guess, DiVincenzo is kind of in the same camp. Dragic as well, 2.2x. He'll be coming off the bench, but should be getting like near starter minutes. I would expect him to get more minutes than, say, someone like Duncan Robinson. Dragic is very high usage. He just doesn't do much as a rebounder or defensive player. Lopez and Ariza kind of stand out as plus defenders. Lopez is a plus shot blocker. He's got like a 4+% block rate, which is highest on on the slate between the two teams. So he's per opportunity to make a block, more effective shot blocker than, say, someone like Giannis. At 2.2x, that defensive upside I think is going to play up. And then Ariza is not an elite shot blocker or elite stealer, but I'd say he's good, not great in both of those categories. Thinking with Lopez over Ariza as we have projected, slightly higher usage rate for Lopez. Both of the guys can, score points from behind the arc, which has, the half-point bonus on SuperDraft. But Lopez, I think, just does a little more as like a rebounder, maybe a little more as a defender, and also has the ability to get to the line maybe at a slightly higher propensity than Ariza. I think was looking at it this morning, and Lopez is like 0.23 free throws per field goal attempt. Ariza at 0.18. So, Lopez is getting about, I don't know, what is that, like 20-25% more free throws per shot attempt than Ariza, and then just by virtue of being a higher usage player is going to be taking slightly more shots. So, but I think both seem like strong plays. I mean, both are probably in this kind of top tier of players that are going to get solid minutes and have like this high multiplier. Like Robinson, I guess, will get solid minutes, and he's got the 2.25 on him. As mentioned, DiVincenzo, Dragic, none will be starting, but I kind of expect, at least was the case last game, and kind of how Spoelstra has been using Dragic has been starting none, but getting more minutes to Dragic. So I think Dragic would kind of stand out as another 2+ multiplier guy who's going to be on the floor a lot. So as far as running this for like multiple lineups, let's say we wanted to create 10 lineups. You can just run it straight through with no sort of settings, and you will get the 10 highest projected lineups. I think kind of the concern here and with any single game format is there's a lot of value to avoiding duplication with lineups. If you have a lineup that's highly popular, anyone who is using the ASA optimizer and just not setting any rules and running these, you would get the exact same 10 lineups. I think there's pretty high correlation between the projections of different systems, such that there's a good chance that there will be a lot of overlap with these 10 lineups and the top 10 lineups of any other site that has projections. So I think it's valuable to try to promote some degree of like randomness and diversity in your lineup. So I like using the randomness slider at like 5 or 10% just to kind of throw the lineups that we get a little bit off the optimal, such that there is like less chance of duplication. So I just ran that, and we're still getting pretty much the optimal lineup. So it does seem that there is a pretty there's kind of a big drop off between like some of the these top 5 players and maybe some of the other secondary considerations. So maybe we want to turn that randomness up to 10. Then I like using the bounce rate as well. So what that does is anytime we roster a player in the optimal, the optimizer will try to build lineups linearly. So we'll seek to build the best lineup, and then migrate to the second lineup and build the second best lineup that has one kind of point of differentiation for the first. And what the bounce setting will do is any player who's rostered in that first lineup, it will reduce their projection for subsequent lineup builds by some value. So in this case, by 10%. So all these players are rostered the top lineup, and then their projection will be reduced by 10% for subsequent builds. That randomness component will be re-injected into projections for the second build. And then any player that is not featured in the second build that has a reduced projection, their projection will regenerate by half the difference of their kind of bounced projection and their true projection. So like Ariza was featured in the first lineup, not featured in the second. So he'll have a 5% regeneration, such that for the third build, he'll have projection that's 95% of his true projection, and then there will be some randomness injected in there. So we can kind of like see how this plays out when we do the 10% bounce, 10% randomness. We can see that no player has a total exposure more than 70%. We have 12 different players making up 10 different lineups. If we were to set these back to kind of the default settings with 0, we can just kind of see, we can do a quick run and see some of the impact from diversity standpoint. So now, we have 3 guys that are featured in all lineups, Ariza, Lopez, and Holiday, and we only have 7 unique players in 10 lineups. So, I think fidgeting with that and kind of figuring out what the right settings mix for you is advisable. Like, I don't think there's any set rule that's the best or the worst or correct or incorrect. Just understanding how those settings impact your builds and the diversity of your builds, I think, is valuable. So if we move along to Denver and Portland, Denver, I think, is a team that probably had the loosest rotations out of the 4 teams that are playing tonight. If we look back to their game 1, they played, I think, 9 different players, and the most minutes they had was Michael Porter Jr., who played 37 minutes. They didn't have any guys play over 40. I guess Milwaukee wouldn't have had any players play over 40 if you discount the overtime period. But they also had, guys playing in the low 20s. They just seemed kind of there was fewer guys locked into like 35 plus minute roles. It was really just Porter and Jokic. So yeah, expecting them to keep it maybe a little bit looser and not be quite as tight. Portland, on the other hand, I think was pretty tight. Like Nurkic had a season high 33 minutes. He played, I think, 34 in a game early this season that went into overtime, but season high for regulation minutes for Nurkic. So he appears to be fully back, and I think Portland is comfortable kind of giving him the full run. Lillard, Powell, and McCullum are kind of the perennial top minutes getters for Portland. McCullum and Lillard leading the way, Powell not far behind. That was the case in game 1. And, so expect that to hold true for game 2, barring a massive blowout. So looking at top projections, just looking at top raw projections, naturally, Jokic, this guy that's been filling it up all years, averaging close to a triple-double. Lillard is, as we know, hyper-productive scorer, distributor, not a total zero, as a rebounder for kind of a true point guard. So these guys kind of top our raw projections, but when we go by value, Nurkic really stands out as a strong value. The thing with him for kind of the later part of this year is his minutes have been up and down. He's had minutes in the high 20s or low 30s, and then the next game minutes in the low 20s. With the long rest in between games and the playoffs with shorter rotations, I think it's pretty easy to project Nurkic for 30 plus minutes, barring any sort of foul trouble. And the guy's just a great rebounder. Rebound rates north of 20%. He's a decent shot blocker, not an elite shot blocker, but I would say good, not great shot blocker. Productive scorer. Obviously McCullum and Lillard are going to be kind of the 2 primary options, or maybe Lillard primary, McCullum secondary option in the Portland offense. But Nurkic is definitely kind of a tertiary, third or fourth option. He and Powell kind of vie for that third role. I believe he took 10 shots in game 1. Not super 3-point oriented. Most of his scoring is going to come inside the arc. And I think, one thing about Nurkic that gives him a decent floor is he's a very underrated passer. He's got the 3rd highest assist rate on Portland behind Lillard and McCullum. So like Jokic, maybe not to quite the extent that Jokic can be like a distributor from the center position. Nurkic should be expected to get a few assists, 2+ assists. So I think that gives him a nice floor. He's got great double-double potential for rebounds and points. Not sure that he's quite a distributor that gives him much triple-double equity, but I do expect him to pad his production with some assists. And at 1.9x, I mean, he is kind of in this tier like outside of the elites. Of course, Jokic and Lillard are towards the bottom. Jokic at the 1x floor, Lillard not far behind him. McCullum kind of in this middle tier. And, then after that, it's Porter, I think, is a real strong play. Gordon, less so. Nurkic, though, in that 1-9 and Powell. So there's kind of this tier among secondary starters, and we start getting down into bench players like Carmelo, Millsap, Covington will be starting, Monty Morris. So Nurkic kind of feels like the best player in this secondary tier of players with regards to how many minutes we can expect him to get and his per minute productivity in that time that he's playing. So yeah, we like Nurkic a ton. He's clearing the second best projected player, which is Porter, by if you look at it, what is that? 16 or so post multiplier fantasy points. So Nurkic is a guy. It doesn't feel comfortable locking in players into the championship slot. I think Nurkic is a fine consideration to just lock into all lineups. But I feel like Nurkic is one of those guys that you could get away with locking into the champion slot. Like yesterday, I wasn't, I don't make an effort to lock any player. I kind of just let the optimizer and projections do its work. But out of I think 6 lineups had Bogdanovic as the champion in all 6 of them, and that was with some degree of bounce and randomness. So, sometimes if these guys are just so strong from a projection standpoint, it's more than okay to have multiple lineups where you just have one guy locked into champion. Naturally, if that guy fails, you're in a tough spot. But I think with these single game contests, and especially in the playoffs where rotations are pretty tight, you got to find some guys to take a stand on. So Nurkic feels like that guy tonight. Michael Porter Jr. I think is strong utility consideration, and I think a decent champion consideration as well. Campazzo we've got a strong projection on him. Both he and Rivers have really high multipliers and are part of that Denver starting lineup. They both got 30+ minutes in game 1. Would expect that to be the case tonight. Neither are super high usage, even though they're both guards. Like Jokic does so much ball handling that, he kind of absorbs what typically would be guard assists or, kind of late in the shot clock 3-pointers or, transition field goals. One of the things to note with Campazzo is he is a strong defender, has a high steal rate. So at 2.4x, and especially, I expect him to be put on either Lillard or McCollum for most of the game. Both of these guys, do a lot of ball handling. So I think good opportunity for Campazzo to rack up some steals. I do feel though, like he is one of these guys for champion purposes. I might gravitate more towards someone like obviously Nurkic or MPJ, but even like Lillard or Jokic, I do have concerns that it would just take like a real outlier game for Campazzo to really fill up the box score such that he is the highest value. I think he kind of feels, at least to me, like a guy with a high floor, but not super high ceiling. Like he doesn't shoot enough or, factor in he's a good distributor with the ball, but he's not such a ball dominant point guard that I think he's got a ton of likely paths to like a double-double. I think really he would break the slate as a champion if he finds a way to get like 5 steals or something like that, which is within the range of outcomes. But he would need to go like 5 steals, have a productive game as a scorer and distributor. He might be a guy that if you are using any sort of bounce or randomness, factors. You might get some Campazzo in the champion spot, but he might be a guy that I consider fading as a champion. Fine to play him as a util player, but avoid him as the champion slot. And then as we get down here, just kind of a grab bag of starters. Like obviously McCullum is going to play a lot and be relatively high usage, but he's got 1.35 multiplier on him, which is a little pricey. And our projections prefer taking like lesser guys, guys with higher multipliers who have maybe lower usage, like Powell or Rivers or Gordon, who's got not figured. He I guess won't be in the starting lineup, but he will be kind of their sixth man off the bench. Even Covington at 2.15, he will play a lot and be low usage. He's also kind of a plus defender. I think that could rack up steals. But at 2.15, I would prefer like Campazzo, who I think just has just as much steal equity as Covington and probably can do a little more from like a assist standpoint. So yeah, when we run the optimizer, we can see the optimal lineup that we're generating. So that's Nurkic at captain, and then going with Jokic and Lillard, the two studs on the slate, and then filling it in with Porter, who's kind of like a medium price starter, and then Campazzo, who's a high multiplier starter. I think that looks like a strong build. I think in general, kind of building around this Nurkic, Jokic, Porter, and kind of even Lillard core makes sense. And then figuring out kind of what to do with your fourth guy, like Rivers seems viable. A case could be made for Powell. I think feels like a kind of safe, low variance way to go. Potentially sliding, Jokic or Lillard into the champion slot, maybe lowers variance a little bit, but I don't know. I think Nurkic feels pretty safe. He would just have to get, into a bad foul situation, I think, to really bust, or just struggle to get rebounds. Jokic, I think, is a strong rebounder, but I do think, Nurkic should have plenty of opportunities to, pad the rebound stats. So for tournament purposes, as mentioned, we kind of want to turn up our bounce and randomness. Just looking at projections, I'm expecting it to be pretty tight. Kind of once you get past these top three guys, like I would, expect Nurkic, Porter, and Campazzo to be in most lineups. But I do think we should get some pretty good variance in kind of these guys who project in the low 60s to mid to low 50s. Really, Jokic through McCullum, I think should get some good diversity there. So I don't feel the need to turn like the bounce or randomness super high. I think by keeping it fairly low, we should get some decent diversity, but we can kind of see what it looks like when we run it through. So yes, getting a lot of Nurkic captain, kind of Nurkic MPJ captain. Powell, who we don't have as like a super strong projection, so maybe he just caught like a good randomness seed or something on the optimizer. Campazzo at 80%. So I kind of like, it's fine having him in a lot of lineups, but as mentioned, want to avoid, at least I'm thinking want to avoid him at captain or champion rather. If we turn these up, randomness and bounce up, we might get some Campazzo. Yeah, so we got Campazzo champion here. So, if we wanted to kind of add some more diversity, but like fade Facundo Campazzo at captain, and then we run it. So that way we'll get, plenty of Campazzo, 70%, but avoiding rostering him at champion and getting just Nurkic and MPJ champion spots. Yeah, I think that could be a good way to run it. Probably how I will be running it ahead of contest tonight. So yeah, there's the two single game champion mode slates on SuperDraft. I think they might have some non-guaranteed main slate stuff, but a lot of their high dollar contests, two contests with $1,000 up top. So, if you play your cards right in both, you could, walk away $2,000 richer. Encourage you guys to check out our optimizer if you are ASA subs, or if you're not, consider a subscription, or, if not, I know there are a number of other good optimization products out there for SuperDraft. But I'm of the mind. I know they're hand building is kind of an approach that Brandon uses. I tend to take the optimizer route. I think it's just a good way to build lineups at scale. And when building by hand, sometimes you don't quite manage exposures or build lineup. You have an idea of how you want to build lineups, but it's kind of just, I think, using a computer program. It's a good way to do it. So yeah, I encourage you guys to check out the ASA optimizer. We have optimization for the single game, or of course you can do optimization for the full game or for the full 2 game slate to build cash and tournament lineups. So I encourage you guys to check that out. We'll be back Wednesday to break down the playoff games on that night. Not sure yet how many games there are, but probably will be a single game champion mode heavy playoff week on SuperDraft. So we'll probably be back with more single game coverage then. So good luck tonight, everyone, and we will see you on Wednesday.